Welcome to Product Talk series by Pragmatic Leaders. We're glad to see you all here. Before we start today's session, I would like to give you all a little brief about Pragmatic Leaders. At Pragmatic Leaders, you are a part of global family of aspirational professionals who proactively help each other and are invested in each other's career's growth. Pragmatic Leaders functions like a full stack global career accelerator that rests on three core pillars. Pillar 1 is educate. We help you upskill via proven courses and professional industry coaches. Pillar 2 is engage. We run a global community of product managers on Slack with access to online and offline meetups. Pillar 3 is employ. We operate a job platform to help you crack your dream job. Hi Gaurav, welcome and thanks a lot for accepting our invite. Uh, I would like you to take the session forward from here.
Thank you so much, Piyush, and welcome everyone to the brief session that we're going to do over. Just trying to share a few learnings about how to build MVP. So I think I'll begin with a very brief introduction about myself. I am Gaurav and I work for Flipkart in India, and specifically at Flipkart, I take care of the payment acceptance and refunds side of things. So right on the shopping funnel, but towards the far end of it. And previously, I've spent some time with Amazon and a couple of startups, and also tried my hand at building a startup of my own. And most of the experiences that I'm going to be sharing today are, from either my current or past experiences, or from the startup that I've run. But obviously, also I'm going to talk about examples that are otherwise relevant for the discussion. So, very quickly. Second. Yep. Okay. So, we're going to spend about 5 minutes to talk about what really an MVP is. We're going to spend some time on how to build the right kind of MVP, and then take about 20 minutes towards the end to take some questions. So a lot of you shared questions while signing up for this webinar, and I took, thank you so much for sharing them firstly. So I had a chance to go through them and found some very recurring patterns within these questions. So I've kind of tried to address some of the frequently asked ones at the end of this presentation itself. And the 20 minutes that you see here are above, beyond those questions. So I think we'll have enough time to do a good Q&A. So I want to quickly begin about what is an MVP. I think there are a lot of definitions that float around, but I'll just, before jumping onto that, share a quick stat. So almost about 50% of all products or new features that you build tend to fail. And why that happens essentially is because people go on and try to build full-baked products right from the word go, instead of going through an MVP. And while it's very easy to speak about hey, we should always build an MVP and go about iterating on top of it, and we should be agile, and all those buzzwords sound great, but in the practical world, when you start working on building products on a regular basis, it's very tempting to take the problem head on and build the best solution out there first, and do a grand launch email and so on. And that's the fallacy in which most companies fall, and most product people end up making that error. Everyone makes those errors, including myself, and that's when we build not so successful products. A quick stat: more than 40% of startups fail because there was no market need, and no one really built out an MVP or did a set of exercises to ascertain if the market need was there. People just went about building this next big idea that they had, and which is why we are trying to do this session. So what is an MVP? And this is my definition. I'll give a quick walkthrough. I can take a few seconds to read it, but in my opinion, it's the bare minimum amount of product that you need to build with the absolute minimal amount of resources and time to kind of achieve one of the two following things that I've mentioned here, right? You want to test some hypothesis, And mind you, this is not just for startups. Any product that you're building, any incremental feature that you're building, we're talking about the same thing. So you either want to test a fresh hypothesis, or you want an extremely fast time to market when you know there is no big hypothesis there, but you really need to reach the market first because first mover advantage. That's when you kind of decide to build an MVP. So just to capture a quick couple of examples, and this is one of my favorite examples, and I've seen this literally this product grow in front of my eyes. Back in 2010-11, when WhatsApp had just released, obviously there were no gimmicky features that I'm talking about here. No emojis, no file sharing, no fancy business. But at the same time, what is most important to notice is they focused on the right things, right? So they focused on having extremely easy discovery for people. Most of you discovered WhatsApp through your friends when they sent you a invite SMS. The onboarding was super fast. You just had to use your phone number. So no fancy business of the predecessors. No Gmail ID or Yahoo ID required. No BB pin required. Very simple, fast onboarding. You just need your phone number. The core value was extremely simple. We want to allow people to do text messages over the internet free of cost. That was a very simple core value that they wanted to present. Of course, they made it super usable. They focused on the usability and the reliability of the tool. And having said that, what they consciously decided, or why they consciously decided to build these features as opposed to anything else, or even included usability and reliability, is because they were well aware that the market exists. So a lot of chat apps existed before WhatsApp. Internet-based chat apps existed before WhatsApp. So the core value was established. The business case was there. The market was ready. It's just that the current set of products were not solving for the right customer problems, and that's where they stepped in and kind of tried to address. So the earliest of versions also tried to work on their core hypothesis, and we'll speak more about what your riskiest assumption or your riskiest hypothesis is a little later in the discussion. Just a couple of more examples. My favorites. Amazon.com simply started as a website that looked as ugly as what you see on your screen right now. There was a very plain text looking page, and you could literally scour through a directory of books, and they did only books, by the way. So they focused on doing one thing, which is selling books, and then they did that really well before they started building upon the rest of the e-commerce business. And also Airbnb is another favorite. So just a couple of things that Airbnb decided not to do in their MVP. They said, hey, we're not going to take money from people who book Airbnbs. The transaction has to be a cash transaction at the end of the customer. Not even building the complete funnel. That's also something that you might be forced to do when building an MVP. And then I'd like to quickly speak about what's an MLP. So people keep talking about, hey, MVP is an old time concept. The new thing is MLP, which is minimum lovable product as opposed to minimum viable product. And I agree. In fact, I have a slightly different point of view, which I will arrive at a little later. But what is the core difference between an MVP and an MLP? So while an MVP in the traditional sense tried to focus on building the minimum amount of functionality, an MLP tries to build the minimum amount of product that delivers a core value in the most scaled version, but without actually building it for scale. So taking back the example of WhatsApp actually focused on not just the core functionality, but also on reliability, on the usability of the product. It was super important to kind of build for everything in this in this need pyramid that we see that a product goes through, as opposed to only building a thin part of the functional stack there. However, for the rest of our discussion, I'm going to interchangeably use both MVP and MLP. In my opinion, MVPs were never supposed to be this ugly. They were always supposed to be MLPs. And I think somewhere the terms got misconstrued and people started using two separate terms, but we are going to stick to using the term MVP. So how do you build an MVP? And I think over the next 10-15 minutes, we'll try and discuss not just how to build an MVP, but is your case something that actually requires you to build an MVP? And we'll see why I asked that question. So there are multiple tools available to kind of enter a market, or to start offering value to the customer. MVP is, of course, we discussed, it's the minimum amount of product that you build to test your core hypotheses and so on. There's also something called as proof of concept, and a proof of concept is something that is typically used when it's a small, it's a technical capability or a product feasibility that you do not even know if it exists. So just to give you an example, if you were to kind of build even WhatsApp, you would want to check the product feasibility, or as some may call it, the technical feasibility of sending chat messages over the RPC protocol super fast and seamless as WhatsApp actually wanted to do. So before building, a user interface that can, have two parties connect over it, a simple API could have been built just to, check whether the message actually goes as fast as it needs to for the optimal customer experience that they're building for, right? And again, there is the prototype, and prototype is, of course, an exercise that we all end up doing while building products of any size and scale. But what prototypes enable us to do is build something that might not even be a product. It might be the most hackiest way of building something, and then you would want to kind of take it to your customer in the form of a UI mockup, or let's say in the form of a click-through mockup, and then you kind of let your customer play around it, experience what it would be like to build that product, because building products is extremely costly. You want to fail as fast as possible, and that's what the entire world of MVP and proof of concept is all about. So quickly moving on. Yeah. So I'll give an example on each of these. So MVP, we spoke obviously about WhatsApp, and we also spoke about a proof of concept on WhatsApp. But let me give you an example from my personal experience. So when I was out building my startup called Being Doc, we were trying to build a content platform for doctors, for medical doctors in India. We actually did not start out by building a product. We started out by building a newsletter. So a newsletter that had simple news articles or medical research articles from the previous day. And we actually had a medical co-founder who was a doctor. So he actually sat through and selected 5 of these articles, minified them just like what InShots does to news articles. He actually sat and minified them every day into a small paragraph, and we used to kind of put them together into an email and send it to our customers, which were doctors. And that was our bare minimum product. And the hypothesis that we were trying to prove is, are doctors even interested in learning more about their field? Is it just a matter of them not getting enough time, which is why they are not constantly updated about medical science and so on? So some of these were our hypotheses, and we started out building a newsletter. So that's kind of a proof of concept. Another thing obviously is prototype. And prototype, I don't have any specific example, but a lot of times when we're trying to build a larger product, and specifically in the B2B segment, and someone actually asked this question, how do you build MVPs for B2B products where way too much is at stake before building a product, where the complexity of the product itself is high, a lot of prerequisites before you build a product. You build a prototype and you go ahead and test the core hypothesis on the prototype, instead of building all the prerequisite, getting the customer data and so on. So you need to ask a bunch of questions that I've mentioned on the left hand side. Who's your customer? A lot of times it is very easy to just keep blabbering about who the customer is, but start writing a paragraph about who your customer is. That's when you'll start finding the most difficult part of building products is actually defining who your customer is. We will talk about how to do that a little later on this session. But yeah, I mean, who's your customer? What is the core customer problem? Not the problem that the customer is talking about, but what is the underlying customer problem is what you need to get at. Is the customer problem proven? Is it something that is validated? Or is it a figment of the enthusiast product manager's imagination, which is, by the way, a lot of cases, right? 40% of startups imagine a need and then they build a product, as opposed to actually validating if the product actually, the problem actually exists. What is the competitive landscape like? Is it a very evolved landscape? There is active competition that is making money on it, or you're a new entrant. How nascent is the technology that you're going to use, or how nascent is the know-how of the technology that you're going to use? Just to take an example, if and I'm talking about in the payments landscape here, because that's the current problem on which I'm working. But let's say a network like a Visa or MasterCard comes up with the next big way of easing, making online payments. Do I jump on that? Do I actually evaluate the underlying technology? They keep talking about NFC, but is NFC something that is available on everyone's phone? Is NFC something that Android developers can easily integrate with because the platform provides for the functionality? Some of these would be considerations that I would want to present before I decide whether I want to go on that opportunity or not. Are there too many prerequisites to test the core hypothesis? And again, we'll come to what a core hypothesis is and how to arrive at that. But essentially, it's a process of identifying which are your most important hypotheses, which are the riskiest ones. If there is a hypothesis which, if proved incorrect, can make your entire exercise irrelevant, and that's the hypothesis that you want to test first. But to be able to test that, if you need to build 10 more features, you need to build a sign up, you need to build a share functionality and this and that. Is it really worth it? Is it really going to be an MVP, or is it going to be something else? So you need to become more innovative about how you want to address that problem. And this was my favorite. Can you build something in 2 to 3 weeks? While I say MVPs should take how much ever time they need to actually completely evolve into the right usable product that you can ship to the customer, they don't have to be great products. And don't do anything that you cannot do in 2 to 3 weeks by a 1 or 2 developer team at best. So what I'm trying to do on the right side is bucketize the answers of your questions on the left hand side into what tool should you be using. And I'm actually going to start at the bottom of this table. So if you are not clear on A, B, on C, just don't bother doing anything else. Go back to basics, understand your customer problem better, go talk to your potential customers, try to understand your market better, talk to experts, talk to adjacent industry experts. If you want to start a restaurant or rather a food delivery business, and if you know very little about the customer and the problem, why don't you actually go and speak to restaurant owners who are currently sending their people to ship food? Just a very basic example there. Next is if A, B, C, and D are very clear to you, who's your customer, what's the problem is proven, and the landscape exists, and the technology is absolutely evolved, what do you need to do? And of course, the prerequisites are too high. Can you quickly build a prototype, which is your differentiator value? Now, see, when I'm saying here, E, that is the technology is evolved, and D, the competition landscape exists, is pretty clear. In such a case, there are incumbents. Then what is the differential value that you're going to provide? So when, and I do not know if Swiggy did this, but if I were Swiggy and if I were entering after a bunch of players who are already doing food delivery, my question would be, what is the differential value that I'm providing? Is it speed of ordering? Is it speed of delivery? And then I would figure out a creative way of testing those hypotheses. And the hypothesis there is whether my customers actually care for what I'm trying to provide. Do my customer care beyond getting food faster than 30 minutes? Do my customers care about being able to book very easily? You do not know, and that is something you need to evaluate. And that's when you actually focus on either a basic mock-up driven prototype, if it's only about the user experience. But if it is about the customer experience in terms of receiving the product on time, you got to get innovative there and think of another way to prototype this whole thing. Moving on to the POC. So you typically do a POC, like we spoke earlier. If it's a new market and the technology that you're using is extremely nascent, you want to be slightly hacky about what you want to build. So for example, in my startup, I built a newsletter, which by the way, a lot of content companies begin at. Or you might just do a simple tech POC, pick up the tech, see what documentation exists, do the end-to-end integration, see if you can send one message from one point to the other or not. Whatever is the core value of the technology, just focus on that. And if your answer falls into the first bucket, then that's when you choose MVP as your tool. I'll just be on this slide for another 5 seconds and move on. Okay, so quick time check. We have about 15 more minutes before we need to begin the Q&A, the interactive Q&A. So I think we're good on time. So also the other big mistake that a lot of people do, or especially when you're new to the market or when you're so engrossed and married to the problem, you end up thinking that, hey, MVP is like this golden key to enter the nirvana of a mature and stable product. Once my core hypotheses are done, I think I'll be able to go ahead and ship the most beautiful product and move on from there. However, that's not the case. Often it's a very iterative journey. A lot of times you'll come back to square zero, where you have absolutely no idea of whether your hypothesis is tested or not, whether you will get any success or not, and hence your product is not mature, or your idea rather is not mature. And you keep iterating using a combination of tools, and we'll speak about why a combination of tools. But essentially you keep iterating until you find success on your riskiest hypothesis, and then kind of build on top of that and test your other most important or riskiest hypothesis, and so on. By the way, I've put sources on all of these slides from where I'm picking some of these concepts. Some of these articles are really good. You should spend some time reading them. That'll really help you clear your understanding of MVP a lot more. The next step that I would do typically is not begin with building a product. So I know that I have a problem and I want to solve it, and I'm very enthusiastic about it. But and I've spoken about, you should pick a tool and this and that. But hey, before any of this, I think what you need to really do is spend some time writing some things down. And this is something that I picked from Amazon. Until you actually sit down and try to write about problems, you understand very little about them. About problems, about ideas, about your customer, about anything. So I would really recommend you writing. And some might say, you're talking about speed and you're talking about writing, boring, long process. I would say spending 2 hours of writing will save you days of writing unnecessary code, or spending hundreds of dollars on trying to shove an inferior product over, through ads on Facebook and Google. So I'd really much rather focus on the writing part and write for yourself. You don't have to essentially write to show the documentation to someone else. You don't have to think that writing is only required because documentation, process, etc. Write your ideas down for your own clarity of thought. So I would typically begin at elucidating the problem, building or rather creating structure to it. I'd begin with defining who's my customer, and as easy as it might sound, once you try to kind of write about it, it becomes more and more difficult. So to take a small example, when I was doing my startup, my first customer statement was, this product is for doctors, Indian doctors. And then when I started thinking, will a 55-year-old Indian family physician sitting in tier 2 town care about my product? I realized probably not. And that's when you kind of start thinking in terms of customer personas. What are the various customer personas that would be actually interested in your product? Which in my case were recent college graduates who are right out of college as doctors, and would continue to have the hunger of learning more about medical research, or doctors who are going to prepare for their masters or for super specialty. They are the kind of people who are always interested in the new tech or the new research that is coming out. So define these various personas. Not just that, kind of try to size each of the personas. Market sizing or just guesstimation is an activity anyone trying to build a product would essentially need to do. So try to size each of these personas and then pick just one persona. Don't focus on all of those personas, because when you start thinking about the other personas, you'll start having complementary problem ideas, and you'll kind of get bogged down on them. So just pick that one persona that is the biggest persona for your problem and kind of go deeper into that persona and redefine the problem for them. So when you try to redefine the problem, saying, I'd like to build a product that enables recent graduate of medical college to continuously keep learning about latest medical research in an easy manner, without using too many gadgets, without subscribing to medical journals. That's a more specific problem, and that's something that gets evolved over time. So make sure at the end of the customer definition, you kind of redefine the customer problem as well. Triangulate or rather validate your problem using all the available information, and triangulate using multiple information. So you'll do a survey of certain doctors, and you'll hear something. And this happened with me a lot, by the way. I go to a tier 2 towns medical college and I hear a few things. I go to a metro city medical college and I hear other things. So you need to kind of meet a few hundred people before you can form a very good opinion. Some you will meet over surveys, some you will meet over one-to-one meetings, some will be pure observations, and you kind of try to triangulate the data that you get from these various sources and clearly understand what you really know about these people, which are your customers, and what is it that is a complete hypothesis for you or an assumption for you. And once that is done, I think you need to build in the process of carving out hypothesis and list down what all is an assumption for you. I think each assumption is essentially a hypothesis. Which of them are pure gut feels, because a lot of them will be pure gut feels, right? My imagination that, or my gut feel that the recent graduate doctors would be the most tech savvy was proven wrong. A lot of them were still very bookish, did not like using the phone like some engineers or product people would like doing in terms of quantum of time per day and so on. So a lot of your hypothesis will be pure gut feels and will get invalidated. Which hypotheses are the most riskiest? Basically, something that I spoke about earlier. If this hypothesis proves incorrect, my business breaks. And that hypothesis for me was doctors are interested in constantly learning about medical research. If that hypothesis breaks, there's no point of me attempting to do that business, right? So the problem itself is an hypothesis, and a lot of times we tend to think problems are so clear and evident that we do not have to validate them as hypotheses, but they continue to be hypotheses until you actually find product market fit. And hey, 40% of startups never find product market fit. So yeah, once you've identified your riskiest hypothesis, I think you need to use the framework that I shared here and kind of pick one of the tools between these three if you feel you do not know enough about the problem. Back to basics. So moving on. So yeah, the essence of this slide is Don't think in terms of, hey, I want to build an MVP. Think in terms of how much do I know, what tool do I need to use, and then how do I get from there to building a real product. Now, once, based on the tool, you arrive at, hey, I need to build an MVP, or as I would suggest, even if the tool suggests build an MVP, kind of stick to building a prototype, and it will also manifest in this process I've listed here. Try to do prototyping more. Build something on paper, build something on build a hacky way of doing something, and then kind of take it to solutioning. I'll in fact talk about another example that I tried when I was doing my startup. So I was out there outside of hospitals, visiting people, overhearing patient conversations and this and that. When I had this epiphany, people who are expected to undergo surgery tend to take a second opinion. And I thought, wow, that's a great business. I'll offer second opinions to people from doctors that do not know them, so that they will be getting unbiased second opinion, because second opinion, again, my hypothesis was often tends to be very biased, because hey, that doctor is bad, maybe you should get the surgery done from me, right? So these were some of my hypotheses, and the way I tried to hack this problem, or rather prototype this problem, so to say, was I just built an Excel sheet of a process that I would follow to simply do everything that I spoke about, a remote second opinion of through a doctor that the patient does not know in another city, so that there is no motivation whatsoever to lure the customer or lure the patient. Build that process, tried it for 10 patients who were looking for a second opinion. Turns out people don't need second opinion from doctors who they cannot see, who they cannot speak with. Turns out doctors do not want to be involved in providing second opinion only basis medical history or test documents. They want to actually see the customer. They actually want to ask more questions, and that's something that does not work over the remote model that I had imagined. So prototypes will have to be really creative. They have to be very contextual. Prototypes are often hacks to not build any product whatsoever. What I did was by building zero product, 0 lines of code. So that's something that I'm getting at. And I think if I had any success at that is when I would have started to build an MVP, which is where I'd come back and try to redefine the customer problem once again, because between the initial exercise and now I've learned a lot more about my customer basis the activities of the tool, and that's where I've want to incorporate the new learnings into the customer problem statement. Again, define your key hypothesis, but not just that, it's very important to define your success criteria. A lot of times it's very easy to say, I have a hypothesis, I will test it, and then you test it out, and then you get 1 or 2 customers who are actually interested in your product, and you are like, oh, my hypothesis is correct, and I'm going to build a product out of it, and I'm going to make $1 billion out of this. Do not do that. Define a success criteria and be very practical about it. It's the most difficult thing to do, but it's the most important thing to do as well. So set a very high bar of what success means. It could be a product market fit success. It could be success in terms of the impact that it provides. Just to take an example, anything that you see on both Amazon and Flipkart websites have to go through an A/B test, and each release has to be an experiment that the customer see has to be an experiment. And before doing those experiments, we have to define success criteria. Now, success criteria cannot be, we will increase sales. A lot of things you'll do will increase sales, but it will just bloat your software. It will just make your software more and more complex. There will be a downstream impact of building such software in terms of engineering slowness, in terms of, customers actually increasingly getting confused with so many features to use. So don't focus only on, hey, this will improve a metric, but it will improve a metric at least by so much. So put that high bar for yourself. When you're launching this jazzy new feature, tell yourself, oh, I'm going to build a feature, and basis my estimation is going to increase the GMV, let's say, or sale by at least 1% or 0.5%. 1% might be a huge number in certain cases, so let's say 0.5%, but stick to that bar. If you do not do that, you will go ahead and build products which will look successful today, but will eventually turn out to be not so successful products, which mass customers will not end up using, or most of your customers rather will not end up using. The next thing would be to define flows and create mocks for the offering or for the product that you're building. A general rule here would be to strip off all the developmental complexity. So again, I'm going to take an example from payments. If I was building the first payments page for my startup to accept payments from customers, I would not bother building, the OTP should be auto-read by the app. I don't care actually. The customer really loves my product, they will enter the OTP manually and they will continue to like it despite that. That's a development complexity that I do not want to involve. Is it difficult? Is it lack of tech know-how? No, it's absolutely simple. I can take an SDK from someone and integrate it. Does it take time? Yes, and I do not want to do that. In fact, let some of the complexity lie on the user side. It's okay. If your customers use your product and you meet your success criteria despite the user complexity, that's when you know that you're building the right product. Right? Prototype and test we have already spoken about. You'll get a lot of chance to kind of incorporate the feedback. Ground rule: try to implement something in 2 to 3 weeks at best. Don't forget the testing plan. Don't forget testing the product before you're bringing it out to the customer. And when you actually test your product with your customers, fix a time frame for the experiment. Do not let it be like a 3-day experiment, a 5-day experiment. Let it run for a while, 7 days at minimum. Make sure you are sticking true to the metrics that you have defined, and scale only if you are achieving your success criteria. Very quickly, I'll take 2 minutes to go through a couple of slides, and then I think we'll move to questions. A few learnings that I've collected over the year. Nothing too great, but hopefully they'll be useful to you. Let your engineering team take extremely inferior decisions to enable superior speed. Do not build for scale. It might not come at all. You don't have to write code that lasts for years. Once you have an MVP done, try and move out of that. You will always have the time to rewrite your code and so on. Don't cut corners on reliability. It's expected to not work 100% time or 99.99% time, but at least 80% time your product should just work. Do not cut corners on UX and copy. UX is user experience. It's got nothing to do with how beautiful your product looks. Let it look extremely crappy, that's okay. It should just be enough for the customer to be able to use it. I know it's a slight contradiction from the point I placed in the previous slide, which is, optimize for development speed. I would still say that, but between development speed and UX, focus on development speed. Copy is basically the messaging that you put on your product everywhere, and you have a chance to impress your customers even very early on. When you have the deck, take a chance to go back to the Amazon page, and you'll see some very heart-to-heart connecting text in the first version of Amazon.com. That's what I'm talking about. You need to connect with the customers very early on. Think go-to-market backwards. Please do not think only features. A lot of time you tend to get bogged down by, I'm going to build this. As opposed to that, try thinking of, I'm going to build this, which the customer is going to discover like this and would want to use it because in this context, it is important to them. Think more go-to-market first, is all I'm trying to say there. When trying to build a product, between first principles thinking and copying what exists in the market, obviously it depends on a couple of factors. You should copy when the market offering and timing is very successful. Incumbents are doing it. Feel free to copy. Everyone does that. Copying is not bad. What is bad is not having a market to operate in. First principles is great when you know that a market exists, but the offering that are available in the market today might not be the most optimal, and you're trying to kind of rework towards that. So I think that's what I mean there. Do not write too much specs as product people when you're trying to build an MVP. Focus on what would be acceptance criteria. What if the product is good enough. Don't focus on writing edge cases and this and that. Don't invest your time in that. And just a quick note, do not forget to spend resources on instrumentation and A/B tools very early on in the process. We're moving to Q&A. I think I'm 5 minutes over time, but going to quickly cover some frequently asked questions, and then the remaining questions I think we can ask at the end of it. How minimal should the product be? So it should be just enough to test your risk-based hypothesis. Also, your GTM your time to market essentially should be fast enough to get there first. Losing out on first mover advantage in certain product categories can be fateful for your business. Okay. What is the product core functionality requires? Too many prerequisites. I think firstly, don't think in terms of functionalities. Obviously, if possible, prototype. Even beyond that, if you really have to build functionalities, and it happens in B2B products, and I've worked on one in the past. What you really need to do, or rather what happens is the buyer and the user are different people. The buyer thinks in terms of functionalities, they think in terms of checklists, and to be able to win that account, you need to fill that checklist, build the stripped down version of a product. So you should be able to strip it down to that extent that let's say you should be able to create a message. Now that message should not even require a rich text message. Maybe it's the ideal use case, but you don't have to get into the philosophical line right now. You have to win that account, and which is why I would ask you to just stick to building the leanest version of it. No rich text editor, no emojis, nothing, right? How do you inspire team members involved in building MVP? And some of the things that I would focus on is writing an extremely compelling vision for the team. It's again an activity that you'll have to write down. Show them what you are intended to build overall. Obviously, that will change and it will evolve. But it's always a good practice to show them the larger picture. Show them adjacencies, right? So if not your market, show them similar things in adjacent markets. I think that's also something that tends to inspire teams. Again, it's a very difficult one. It's very subjective to the maturity of the team that you're working with. What's also important is that you re-emphasize the vision that you're talking about at a regular interval, and make sure that your team gets to work on what they're supposed to work on. So if you're talking about an engineering team, they should not have unnecessary issues to not be able to work on the engineering problem that they would like to work on, right? So I think that's what you want to focus on. How much time should it take to build an MVP? General rule, take as much as it likes, but lesser is better, obviously. In the post product market fit companies, I think 3 to 6 weeks for a first version is still fine. But if you're in pre-product market fit, don't even bother beyond 2 to 3 weeks. Just restrict yourself to that time and start building that product out. How to make feature and quality trade-offs? So ask yourself, does it help to test the risk-based hypothesis, building that feature? If no, chuck it. Does it help communicate the core value of your product? If not, again, dump it. Will the absence of this make my customer not like the product? If the answer is no, again, just dump it. And I know some of these are like judgment calls, but these are the judgment calls that you need to keep making as product managers anyway.
Thanks a lot, Gaurav, for taking out time and conducting the session for Pragmatic Leaders. I'm sure everyone would have some concrete takeaways from this session, and we would love to have you once again.
No problem. Glad to be here. Thank you so much for being a great audience and bringing out some good questions that made me really think hard about the takeaways that I would be able to provide in the session. So thank you so much.